Good morning, everyone. It's Clarissa and Anne-Marie.
Good morning.
We are joining you from the comfort of the Brisbane Family Law Centre office, which today is really messy, so I've had to apologise to my friend Anne-Marie as she's jumped over my boxes to get to my desk. And we've managed to get through our technical debacle as well this morning, and we're getting ready to go. I can see a lot of you online, so welcome. If you can just, someone type some questions or just make a comment, just so that we can check here that that side of things is working and that we don't miss questions then when we're going, and just also so that you can check and I can ensure that everyone can hear us as well. That would be really great. So hopefully someone's going to say something soon. This is, I think, the third in our series of collaborative webinars that came about as a bit of a random idea between Anne-Marie and I earlier this year, when both of us were sort of being asked questions by a lot of you about different things that we've all experienced, and we thought one of the best ways that we could start answering those questions is to answer them en masse, and also to get feedback from everyone else around what you're experiencing, what your thoughts are, how that's working. So just checking whether I've got any comments from people yet. I know there's a bit of a delay between when I talk and when you hear, so you may not be hearing me just as I'm talking right now. But if someone could just give us some feedback, that would be great. Get my slides up. Oops. So those of you that don't know us, my name's Clarissa Raywood. I'm the owner here at Brisbane Family Law Centre. I've been a collaborative family lawyer for a little while now, and it's certainly, from my perspective, some of my favourite work that I do. It's the stuff that I really enjoy doing. And what I've seen over the past few years is that the frequency of this work is really starting to increase. And I think, Anne-Marie, you've had quite a similar experience, and the two of us this year particularly are doing a lot more matters together than we have historically.
I think one of the things that's become clear for both Clarissa and I is that there is a flow of collaborative work and interest now that really is starting to come from the clients as much as from the lawyers, which is really encouraging, and which I think is only going to continue if we can, as lawyers, continue to spread the word.
So today, the topic that we thought we'd talk to you about, I aptly called Thrill of the Chase. That was the best I could come up with at about 11 p.m. one night a few weeks ago. How to engage the other party in your collaborative process. And this sort of topic and this question again came from having a chat with some of you, particularly the Townsville crew, around how people are finding it challenging sometimes. They can talk to their client and you've got them in your office and you're able to convince them that the collaborative process is potentially ideal. But then the hurdle then comes in how do you then pass that message on to their spouse, and how do you get their former partner into the process? So that's what we're really going to focus our discussion on today. I guess it's quite a small step in some respects in the collaborative process, but clearly a crucial step, because if you can't achieve it, then you're not going to have a process.
I think it's the conversion of the other side starts to take us into the territory of the unknown and the uncontrollable. And from my perspective, and one of the things that I'm hoping you'll take from today, is that there is an element of not control but interest and priming that you can have in that process if you start the process with your client the right way.
So just in terms of today, I know a lot of you have been on these webinars with us before. Please do feel free to send your questions through. So if you just type them, you should have a chat box in front of you that you can type into. The question pops up on our screen, and we're happy to take questions as we go. In fact, we really, really like them, because otherwise you just get us rambling, and we never know whether what we're rambling about is helpful or not. So feedback along the way is greatly appreciated. Please fire those through. I know that Kate Pateman's having a collaborative webinar party as we speak in Townsville, so I'm hoping you've got good snacks up there, Kate. And as a result, I'm expecting lots of questions from the Kate Pateman office today, Anne-Marie. She's been warned that they need to come through. But please ask your questions. We're very happy to move around and give feedback. This is obviously just our experience in terms of what we've done, what's worked for us, and what sometimes hasn't worked so well for us. I also just wanted to start today by doing a bit of a recap as to where we're at in the collaborative process. So if you've listened to our last two webinars, one of them particularly, we did quite a focus on the initial client meeting. I think it was the last one we did. And those recordings are available on my website, The Happy Family Lawyer, if you want to go back and listen to them. I'd encourage you to do that if you're joining us now as this sort of first webinar, because we're probably 3 steps into the process. So just to put you in context, potentially you've the detail of the actual initial consult with your client we've dealt with last time, so we're not going to go in depth into that process. We are going to focus on the discussions you might have with your client around engaging their spouse, but do feel free to go back and listen to the previous ones in terms of those earlier things.
I just wanted to recap on one thing that we've spoken about in those earlier sessions that I think is absolutely vital to this discussion, and that is about a conversation that you have with your client off the bat about what it is you as a lawyer offer to them. And I increasingly find myself either thinking or articulating to clients that what we're about to do might be somewhat unexpected for them, that it's not going to be a conversation where I decide what matters and how aggressively we should respond to a particular situation. The point of a first interview from my perspective is to learn about the matter and the party and to start sowing some seeds in them that you could do this differently. And Clarissa and I have spoken about when you might start sowing those seeds, and we'll talk a bit more about that today. But from my perspective, I've become aware that one of the things I have to be careful of in that initial client interview is automatically converting everyone to a process that I think is great, because it must be a question of self-selection. And for some people, it's not a process that is at all conducive or productive. And if you're a blind evangelist for the process, then you are likely to run into trouble. If you are able to really give an overview of options, then you have most people have a particular leaning to collaborative practice. It's natural. Then you're better able to filter whether they're right for the process.
Yeah. Now, Bob, while Emma is talking, you've thrown a question at us. I'm going to pause on your question because one of the specific things we want to talk about today is managing or talking with or engaging with other lawyers that may already be involved with your client's former partner. Kate's also just said to me that she's got a black screen, and you shouldn't have a black screen. So can anyone else just give me some feedback? You should have Clarissa's glorious slides that she just managed to put together for the 4th time about 10 minutes ago. So can I just get some feedback from anyone else as to whether you've all got black screens or whether it's just poor Kate in Townsville? Let me know, that'd be great. So focusing on this idea of how do we engage the other party, one of the things I wanted to start with is, where do you have this conversation? Where in the process do you start to look at engaging the other party? And just before we started, Anne-Marie was talking about this. And Rihanna's saying she's great across the road. Kate, you might have to go over there to see our nice slides. So sorry, Kate's office, you've got a black screen. We've got pretty pink screens down here. So anyway, coming back, where do you have this conversation? And Anne-Marie, you were really talking about this as being right from the minute the person touches your office almost.
One of the things Clarissa and I talked about early on is where you make it known that you're a collaborative practitioner, how and when and where. And from my perspective, that now very much defines my practice style. So any client who comes into contact with me starts to hear about this alternative process from the moment they come into contact with my office. If I have the opportunity to speak with them before the initial appointment, I don't say let's do this collaboratively, but I start to explore their expectations with a view to not setting them in a litigious thought process from the outset. And if I can't, they receive a letter from my office, and all clients receive this, confirming their appointment and telling them about the collaborative process, and in closing, a brochure about it. And if you're like me and you are terribly inept in terms of your own marketing material, QCL will help you out. I just enclose the QCL brochure and direct them to the website. So from the very moment that they decide they need to engage a lawyer, they start hearing about it.
And I guess I have a similar process in here. The process in our office is when a client makes an appointment to meet with one of the solicitors in my firm, there's an administrative process where they receive by email a welcome letter of sorts that I wrote that attaches to it some articles that I've written on, those of you that follow my writing on the Happy Family Lawyer, on those sorts of notions of dignified divorce, preparing for the meeting with us. And it's really just trying to set the scene for the style of practice that I run here, so that when the client's coming in again, you've set that frame for this is the style that I operate in here. Now, my firm is a bit different to many of you. I very clearly have set a target in here that I don't wish to be doing litigation. We do very little litigation, and my goal in the next 2 years is to be doing none. So that's the frame that I'm very comfortable setting, because I don't really want the other sort of work. I appreciate, though, that not everyone is in that situation, and some of you are offering quite a full gambit of services, which is entirely appropriate, and some of you quite honestly enjoy doing that. So just think from your own perspective about how you might be able to, from the outset, set the scene for your own client around information of all of these processes, collaborative being one, mediation, litigation, negotiation, whatever it might be.
Can I just make one comment, Bob, in relation to your question? And we're going to come to that. What do you do if the other party already has a lawyer? But it's not. I don't think that this issue is as much of an issue when you start doing it as most people might feel it is. It's a bit like the notion of not giving formal advice in the first meeting. Once you get over that mindset that this will flow naturally, and it flows from having what we've talked about before, that genuine conversation with a client about them as a human being, not them as a litigation position.
So I would say to you that, coming back to how we're engaging the spouse, that conversation will generally occur for me in my initial meeting with my own client. Or I also say it might be a short time thereafter. And my example there is people that I see that have really just separated, that very fresh, this has just happened last week. They're coming to the lawyer because they think that's what you do when this has just happened. And for me, with those sorts of clients subject to some urgent issue, I use that initial consult very much as an information session for them to try and settle them down, send them away to enable them some time, and often with a recommendation for some professional assistance, whether it be with a psychologist or a counsellor. And often those people come back, and often it's 6 months, 12 months even before they do come back. And that's when I'm often having the conversation with them around, okay, well, tell me what's been happening with Bob or Mary. We go back to talking about processes, and then we'd be talking about how would we engage Bob or Mary potentially in a collaborative process. So they're, for me, the two key points that I see I'm really having to contemplate. How, once potentially your client has selected collaborative, how would you engage their former partner? I couldn't think of any other main phases, Anne-Marie.
I completely agree with that, and I suspect that most people who are attracted to collaborative practice are what I would describe as client-focused practitioners, people who are interested in the client as a whole. And if what you're doing at that initial meeting is really trying to get a feel for them, one of the things that, when you ask them about what their goals are, one of the things you might identify is that they're not ready to answer that question yet because of all sorts of other issues that they need to process, and that you pressing on for a legal resolution at that point in time is likely to be counterproductive. And if you're able to identify what they might need in the short term, instill a sense of calm that they needn't come to any knee-jerk reaction now, then I do find, same as Clarissa, that after a little while down the track, they're ready. And more importantly, they're ready to have a conversation with their spouse about this process. And you'll hear why we think that's so important.
Yeah. I was also just contemplating, though, if you're not a lawyer, and I know some of you listening to us today are not lawyers, you're financial professionals or working in the mental health space. I expect that you're in such a wonderful position because you're often more of a neutral person for a couple. And I think you have that potential to often be talking to both of the parties at one time. And that's, I think, sometimes a much easier place to be able to have a conversation around their settlement options, and particularly collaborative being one of those. So I did just want to touch and note that some of you are potentially in a much easier place to have some of these conversations as seeing both people. But you may also still be, let's say, the accountant for one person or the counsellor for one person. And so I think that conversation might be very similar to us being the lawyer for one person in terms of how would you then work with them to engage their spouse. So focusing on what has worked, doing the good stuff first. Chris, you've just flicked a question to us, which we're just about to come to. So talking about process meetings. So I'll come back to that in 2 seconds, because that's one of the things that I think we're going to say has worked and does work. My big thing today that I want you to walk away with, and the irony was when Anne-Marie arrived today, this is the first thing she said to me today as her big ticket item. For this to work, you're really going to have to ask your client. They know their spouse. They may not like them that much right now, but they know them. They know how they take information. They know what sort of human being they are. They know what gets their back up. They know how to press their buttons. So I ask my client, when I'm having that initial consultation, when we've spoken about processes, if my client is interested in collaborative practice, that's what I'd say to them. Is I'd say, look, Mary, what do you think? What do you think would be the best way to approach Bob to have him part of the process? And normally, after some level of discussion, Mary will say something like, well, I could either talk to him, communicate with him in some way, or get someone to help me do that. And that's often, for me, that has been by far the most successful way of starting collaborative matters.
I completely agree with that. And one of the other things that talking in detail to your client in a very practical sense, how are we going to broach this with him or her, allows you to have another kind of discussion with your client in a way that is so informative. If they can't contemplate how this issue might be raised with their spouse, that might tell you an awful lot about the process and the effectiveness of it. One of the things that I often hear when I talk to clients about it, saying, look, that sounds good, and of course we want to do that, and of course we want to stay out of court, but I don't trust him or her. I think it's a very naive expectation that parties in the collaborative process are filled with trust and goodwill. They're not. They're like every other separating couple. They've come to that point because there is limited trust and goodwill. But I think if we all reflect on our clients over the years, you'd be able to, most people, I think, say like me, there are very few people who I have met who actively want to destroy the other. Most people want the process, this period in their lives to end, and don't wish the other undue ill will. So there's a big difference between not trusting the other and being able to work collaboratively. Most people in the collaborative process have fundamental trust issues, and it's okay.
Yeah, agree wholeheartedly. In terms of having that conversation with your client, there seems to be two main steps that I've found clients then take to again engage their former partner. And the first is that they do it directly. So things that I've seen work for my clients are literally they leave my office. Now I've got my book. So what's happening for me in here is that my client takes 2 copies of my book, Splitsville, and they deliver one to their spouse. And often that's being done not with the message of I went and saw this lawyer. It's often being done with the I found this online, I bought us 2, or I've read it, I think it'd be useful, that sort of conversation. So I found my book a really helpful tool in terms of engaging people in any form of process that is respectful. Someone called, sorry, Peter, I'm not sure which Peter I've got, who's got a black screen and total silence. Oh. Can I just say he probably can't hear me, so this will be a wasted answer, and I'll type it in a second when I'm not talking. If you lose your screen, often what happens is you've got too many things running on your computer, and because this is streaming live, if you don't have great internet, it will drop out from time to time. So shut down all of your other applications and don't be working in the background.
Focus
That's the
on
message.
us.
You have to listen to us and have nothing else happening. You can put some quiet music on in the background, not on your computer. But Peter, if you do start hearing us again, that's what I'd suggest you do, is just shut down everything else running in the background, and it should help with the streaming of it. So coming back, I found my book a really helpful tool. Prior to having my book, I certainly utilized resources again, and I would often encourage my client not necessarily to say to their spouse that they've met with a lawyer, because there seems to be some real fear that often comes from hearing the word lawyer. So I often would say to people that just talking about some information that they've found online, speaking to someone, like using an example that isn't necessarily talking about lawyers, but just sort of talking more around information that they've found, and they think this is a respectful process, and would their spouse be interested in at least having conversation with them and exploring it further.
And I don't have a book that I can give clients, and I don't have any homemade resources that I can give clients. And some of you might find yourselves in that boat. And it's a very daunting process to produce material about collaborative practice when you're a burgeoning collaborative practitioner. But as you will hear Clarissa and I say in a subsequent seminar when we talk about marketing, articulating what it is you do in a collaborative process is so vital to working out what dialogue you can have with clients. And what I spend my time doing then with clients is having a really detailed discussion with them about what they're going to say to their spouse, when they're going to say it, where they're going to be, who else is going to be in their ear or immediately afterwards in their ear, what neutral resources are there. And the QCL website, if you haven't already seen it, can give you the directions about how to upload the e-brochure so that you can give your clients a physical brochure, or they can say to their spouse, if they don't want to say, I've already got a lawyer, here it is online, have a look at it, this is a thing I've learned about. I will also give clients names of other practitioners so that we're already just gently sowing the seed. But by what I find useful by giving them the QCL brochure is that it's not, my lawyer said you've got to go to one of these three. It's, here's a process. The process works best if the lawyers are in sync and have experience together. This lawyer says she's worked successfully with these people. If you don't want one of those, here's the website. There's more. It's not some kind of strange, kooky two people trying to do things one way. It's a movement. There are lots of neutral sources of information. One of them is Clarissa's blog. But if you think really carefully about what they think their spouse will need, you can respond to that.
Yeah, and not everyone is a book reader, and not everyone is a video watcher or an internet searcher too. Anne-Marie and I are just finishing a matter at the moment where certainly my client, had you given him a book or sent him some videos,
Tried to email.
Yeah, and he doesn't have email, you know, that none of that would have worked. And it was absolutely the conversation stuff, and that referral came via Anne-Marie's office, with Anne-Marie giving her client details of a number of practitioners and that client ending up with me. And I've just done the reverse in the last week, and we were just talking about some people we both saw last week, similar sort of things. So it's horses for courses, and you've got to sit and really detailed conversation with your client around what might be the best way forward. If you do an initial consult in sort of 45 minutes, you're not going to be able to cover that stuff in that time frame, as well as everything that that person is there to talk to you about. So you are going to really have to think again about the process that you're running within your firm and or within your business generally, and how you're going to factor in the time for that. Because to get this work off the ground, you do need to have time with people to build the rapport, to build the relationships, to understand who they are as human beings, and then to build their process for them, as opposed to saying, here's the custom model and this is what we're going to do. It will need to be built for them. And that starts very much at this very early stage of how do we get Bob or Mary to join us in this. Yeah, so I think spouse directly is my key thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, you might be picking up a theme. We are very, very big on the parties navigating it themselves. It is far and away the most successful process for getting collaborative matters off the ground.
Yeah. If you do have a client that, for whatever reason, is reluctant to have the conversation direct with their spouse, to communicate direct with their spouse, the other way I've found to be quite useful is utilising a trusted friend or a trusted professional to almost mediate or facilitate that conversation. So pulling, I would say to the client, is there someone you both know well? Is there someone you both trust? It may be an accountant if you're thinking of professionals. As family, that it's often a relative, a brother, a sister, someone who potentially is the support for both of them. And that can really, I think, offer an option that may not be your client direct, but is an intermediary almost assisting in that conversation. From my perspective, I would happily talk to the intermediary. I would happily provide them with some resources if the client thought it would be helpful. So again, it's around just talking to them and asking what they think would be best.
And these people are everywhere. They're not just the party's accountant or counsellor. They are family members, teachers, people who are involved in the party's lives who might have some capacity to say, you know what, there's an alternative to an almighty fight about this. And I think this flows naturally from that sort of surrendering in your own mind to the kind of law that you want to practice and why you want to practice it, so that when you're walking your walk and talking your talk, it's a natural discussion, and you then will start to see where the people who might help guide our clients into this process exist.
Yeah. Now, Candice has just asked us a great question, and she says, like mediators, is there a common discussion or pitch that collaborative practitioners should have available to inform potential clients about the process, its pros and cons, thinking along the lines of consistency?
Absolutely. I think that's probably what we talked about in our first or our second seminar, Candice, and it's certainly something that takes some time to evolve in your own mind, and so that when you're speaking it, clients feel it. But I think, as I mentioned at the outset, what you have to be careful of is funneling people into a process that you want them to choose, not that they necessarily self-select.
And I agree with Anne-Marie's comments there, Candice. And the other thing I'd say is that I don't necessarily have a standard pitch. I would adopt it depending, again, on the sophistication of the person that I'm talking to and the context of the person I'm talking to. Anne-Marie and I have been working up a seminar at the moment that we're presenting overseas in a few months, and one of the key aspects of that seminar, it is around marketing, is your pitch as a practitioner and your pitch as a collaborative practitioner, and how that pitch might work if you were pitching to a room of lawyers versus you're pitching to a school teacher around informing them. And we need to have a dialogue available, or tools in our toolbox, again, as professionals, where wherever we are, we can rattle off 2 or 3 lines about what we're about, what we believe in, how we do things. That touches on the key aspects, I think, of collaborative practice to some degree. So that's certainly how I work in terms of wherever I am. I don't use the words collaborative practice, can I say, in my pitch at all. I do use words like dignified divorce. And that seems to resonate with the humans, as I call them, so the non-lawyers, the people out there that, that are actually at root level seeing relationships break down. Words like collaborative practice mean nothing to them, but words like dignified divorce mean a lot. That makes sense. I understand that. And that's what piques their interest, and that's what enables you to talk about a process such as collaborative or mediation as well. The other thing, and Chris, I think it was you that just said this to me in a question a minute ago, a joint meeting. This is something that is becoming, again, more frequent. And I think it's becoming more frequent for some of us because we're getting more comfortable with the work. So we're more comfortable now doing a joint meeting. So a few years ago, we had some trainers coming up from Victoria who spoke to us about doing a joint process interview. And I guess in a simplistic sense, think of that as almost a joint initial consultation with both parties, but really that becomes just an information session where you're talking about the process options that they have to resolve their divorce. So the how, more so than the what. And I remember when those trainers first came up, there was uproar here in Brisbane of, oh my God, how could you do that? You're going to end up being sued because you've got both people there and you can't act for 2 people. And there was all this sort of Drama.
Inconceivable. Could not possibly
It was
be done.
just outrageous. And I don't think Hayley Cunningham's online at the moment, but she and I did this recently together. So we did a together info session, if I could call it that, where neither of us knew really anything other than the names of the clients that were coming to my firm. Hayley turned up, I was here, we brought these people in, and we all chatted for an hour or so. Neither of us knew who we were going to be acting for, or if we were going to be acting for them at all, really. It was literally an information session with the two of us. And that has turned into a collaborative matter. That is the first time I've done that. I'm not sure that, will happen particularly regularly. That was a referral in from a colleague as well. So both parties had already had conversations prior to meeting us with a professional around some of their options, and it was their accountant that referred them in. But as this work's growing and as our reputations are growing, I think that stuff will start to happen a lot more as more people become aware of this option.
And I think thinking about how you're going to navigate that kind of conversation is absolutely vital. Some people will never feel comfortable with it, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think being able to respond in the situation is absolutely essential. That's how you will encourage a client to have confidence in you in taking them on this journey, because it is it sounds so kooky when you say that, but it is a journey, because litigation, you know what you're doing, when you're going to do it, what has to be filed and by when, but the collaborative process isn't like that. You have to be able to convince your client you can deal with anything, including those issues of mistrust and potential hostility when you start getting to some sticking points.
Moving now to our perspective of what has not worked. And while we move there, again, if anyone else has any suggestions of things that they've done that have worked, that haven't fallen into the matters that we've sort of spoken about, we'd really love to hear them as well. It can always help us to know of better things that people are doing. I know some of you are listening now from Adelaide and you've got a fair bit of experience down there. So I'd be really interested to hear whether there's other things that you've done that have been successful in terms of growing collaborative or engaging the other party. But when it comes to what has not worked, there's one thing that I will say to you very openly doesn't work, and it's a letter. When I did my first collaborative training, I was given precedents. I know when I teach you guys, I give you precedents, and one of the precedents is the initial letter to the other party. I know it exists on the QCL website as well.
Rip it up.
Yeah. It's just...
It does not help. And one of the reasons I've come to conclude that it doesn't help is that it doesn't matter what we think we say in a letter. It doesn't matter how conciliatory we think it is. A letter comes in the mail or by email. Who gets a letter in the mail anymore except when it's bad news? And the first thing they see is a lawyer's letterhead. It doesn't matter how groovy we think our letterhead is, we're lawyers. What happens after that, I suspect, is by and large white noise. Cannot possibly be in my interests to do what this letter is saying I should do, and they've just switched off. Yeah,
so I think... yes, tear them up, delete them from your precedent base, ignore everything I told you in training. No, I don't think you're going to have much success if you're at a letter stage. And
it's a bit like the invitation from the FDRP to FDR. If you need that, you're in a bit of trouble.
Yeah. So exhaust all other options, but if you're the one lucky person online today that has had success with a letter, again, I'd be thrilled to hear from you. But I certainly haven't, and I pride myself on having one of the most non-lawyer letterheads in the universe, and I can't do it. So I think that's the least successful way of engaging another party.
From my perspective, one of the other reasons why it's unattractive is that one of the key components of the collaborative process is the absence of correspondence like this. And if you're really authentic to the process, you don't start it with something that they're never going to see again. It doesn't create the right impression. There are other ways to engage people. They might be more challenging for us in our mindset, but I imagine no one's ever sold a car by sending someone a letter.
That's good. I like that. All right, so this is coming, I think, to some of the questions that, Bob, you've been firing through to us as we've been talking, and that is the multi-million-dollar problem, if you could see it that way. What if you've met this delightful client, you've had a lovely meeting with them, they're really inspired by collaborative practice, they're saying, yes, that's what I want to do, but here's the 10-page letter that I got last week from firm X, who are acting for my husband or wife. What are we going to do, Anne-Marie, in that scenario? Do you like how I just passed that to you?
I increasingly, as I get more confident in my collaborative skills and my problem-solving skills generally, am less put off by what might have gone before than what my client is telling me their goals are. And we've all seen them, clients who say, I don't know, I don't think this is what she wants. I don't know why they're writing like this. I had a nice conversation with them when they picked up the kids yesterday. People, when they go to lawyers, by and large, are told how they should respond to this situation, and it's lawyer-centric. If a client had a letter saying, and it was early in the process, from a non-collaborative lawyer, I would still talk to them about the process and whether or not they think their spouse is wedded to this practitioner, and whether or not they think there's an ability for that person, and this is a big ask, to end that relationship with that solicitor to whom they've probably paid a whole lot of money and start again. It's not impossible, but it's harder. Even if you can't convert them, you don't have to respond in kind. There is every opportunity in every matter to gently influence the thought process of all concerned, even in litigious matters. And sometimes what has to happen in litigation is you have to let the worst unfold and everyone realise, or the parties all realise, that wasn't very pleasant and there's not a lot to be gained, and to then start thinking about whether you could come at it differently.
And I had only one of these exact scenarios 2 months ago where I rang the solicitor that had written to my client, and he'd written what I considered to be one of the nicer letters from a non-collaborative lawyer. He tried really hard to keep the language quite neutral, and he'd put a proposal forth for a process, and it wasn't a difficult letter at all. And I rang him, and I think he said to me something like, "Oh, you're that collaborative person I've heard about you." And I was like, "Well, yes, I am." And I said, and he's not a collaborative lawyer, so I wasn't about to try and convince him to become one overnight. But I did suggest that we could try a couple of different things. We could try Without Prejudice conference, which I think we're going to do soon. And I agree with Anne-Marie. For us to affect change and to get more of our colleagues interested in understanding this process, they're great opportunities to do that sort of thing. So it may not be pure collaborative in the sense that we all know and understand it, but you can take the skills that you utilise in this process and apply them to everything you're doing, including litigation. And I think it will make for more peaceful settlements for families, certainly more peaceful work for us. And it will be what will really start to grow this process further. Bob, some of your comments and questions, you're saying things here that your experience, I think, has been that some solicitors prefer to stay in the litigation model. It may be more lucrative for them, those sorts of things. That may be correct. I think what happens for all of us as human beings is change is a bit scary. And if you've been a practitioner in family law for many years and you're used to doing things a particular way, it is a bit scary when someone starts saying, let's change that.
And particularly so if you think the system works.
Yeah.
If you think it's delivering something helpful to families, it's a very difficult mindset to shift. If you've already come to the conclusion that it's probably not delivering terribly good things to families, then the fear becomes a little bit easier to deal with. But Clarissa and I have said in so many forums, it is a very significant paradigm shift, and it comes slowly.
Yeah. Now, Chris, you're making some great comments here about things that you guys are doing in Adelaide that have been working. So Chris is saying that coaching a client how to share collaborative materials with their partner, i.e. at the kitchen table or coffee shop meeting. So I'm interpreting that, Chris, to mean that you're doing a bit like what Anne-Marie was talking about, I think, where you're really getting right down to the nitty-gritty of how is your client going to have that meeting or that conversation with their partner. And I think that's a really great thing to be doing. And you've also said here, we do offer joint process meetings. It's important to ensure it's only process, and parties will want to go to rights and entitlements and want you to mediate, and you've got to avoid this. So yeah, I expect that would be one of the traps when you've got people there, is them not, through no fault of their own, they've got questions and they would probably like some answers. So.
And that's what I was saying earlier about really thinking through what you're going to say if you have one of those meetings, so that you've got a very firm, immovable response when you start to get into that territory, because obviously that's a slippery slope.
I'm coming to the end, and I guess the other thing that I just wanted to touch on is what I'll call the other thing to consider. And for me, it's timing. Like all of these sorts of matters, people going through relationship breakdown, timing is everything in my experience. And again, this idea for me came from a matter that Anne-Marie and I were finishing last week. We were having what I think will be our final meeting. It was a really poignant moment at the end where Anne-Marie's client spoke about how, I think in a simplistic sense, how she'd really appreciated the collaborative process and what it was able to deliver to her. She also made the comment that had she been asked to be involved in that process at the point where she and her husband had separated, which was some years ago now, there's been a number of years that have passed, that there is no way she could have done it, and there's probably no way she could have seen that the outcome would have been almost valuable to where she was at that point in time. I hope that makes sense. But what I took from what she said that day and what I found so fascinating was the timing was everything. She really was still grieving, they both were, but I take it that the intensity of her grief almost had subsided enough that she was able to sit and able to see things from different perspectives and able to process things in the collaborative way that I think she was openly saying she wouldn't have been able to do that previously.
I think most people are likely to make very different decisions in the immediate throes of separation than what they do down the track. And if you just think about it in the context of a mediation, many people come to mediations ready to settle in a way that they're not at the time that correspondence starts being exchanged, partly because they're worn down by the legal process, but also partly because they've had time to process the reality of their circumstances. And I actually, if I reflect on it, think that most of my collaborative matters have had a significant period of separation before they have started that process, if not before they've even come to me, which suggests there's a certain type of person who's attracted to that process. And one of the things that keeps going through my head every time we have these sessions and every time I prepare for a collaborative matter is that it's an intensely thoughtful process. Every single thing you do is thoughtful. That initial conversation, drilling right down to the conversation the client's going to have with their spouse, what's going to happen next when they leave this office, everything about it is thoughtful in a totally different way to litigation. It's not about whether or not it meets the rules of evidence, but about this particular individual and their particular spouse. And the people who really respond to and are attracted to the process are also thoughtful. This client was thoughtful enough to know not to start this discussion in the throes of separation and to know that it was okay to wait. And don't by any means think that this was a couple who wouldn't have benefited from some short-term relief, because they had a very intense and difficult period post-separation. Time is really helpful.
Yeah. The other thing with timing is just think in a very micro sense about the timing of your client's discussions with their spouse or engagement with their spouse. If you're doing that, 2 weeks after separation and your client was the one that's made that decision and they're ready to sell the house and move on next week, and the other person has just found out and is in grief, I would be in any event having a very big conversation with my client around, do we need to do this week? What do we need to do this week to keep you guys on the right path? But engaging lawyers in such an early stage tends, in my experience, to create havoc. So timing in a micro sense, and the other timing in a micro sense for me, when I'm talking to a client about how they're going to have a conversation or meeting, I'm interested to know where the children are. I'm interested to know what the arrangements are. You don't want to be firing emails off at changeover. You don't want to be having these conversations at changeover. So just being mindful again of those small things that will really impact on how receptive a person is to the information that's being given to them.
Christopher has raised a really interesting idea in terms of what he uses. There are very significant resources on the IACP website. If you're not a member of IACP, I really encourage you to join. The resources are enormous. And there are very many practice groups in the United States who have different and nuanced resources. But I would just say this. From my experience, the American process is just culturally different to that which resonates with my clients. And I think you need to be thoughtful, again, about how you can adapt those resources to our clientele so that it resonates with them and it doesn't just seem like some American process. So slavish application of what works in other places is not necessarily going to help.
Yeah. Yep, I agree. The resources on there are so useful. Chris has really helpfully given us a link there too. I think it must be the chart that you're referring to there, Chris, of the 5 different process options. And I agree with Anne-Marie. I know QCL's put a lot of time up here in Queensland into creating resources for members that have that sort of information in them. Those of you that have done my training would have all of my resources that have taken, many of them drawn from the American stuff. They've done it, so why recreate the wheel, but turned it into Australian language, if that's the right way of putting it, and made it a bit more workable. And Chris is just saying that Bev Clark down in Adelaide has Australianised, good word, thank you, the American stuff. So that's, I agree. If you know, like all of us, no one has time floating around, they're a great place to start. Get your hands on those resources. At the very least, it's something. And over time, you'll find ways to manipulate them to suit your own needs. So we're coming to an end, and those of you with questions, comments, now's the time to fire them through to us so that we can answer them off for you. Our next webinar that we're going to do is the 29th of September, 11 a.m, and we're going to do marketing for 2 reasons. For us, it'll be a trial run of part of our presentation anyway that we're going to be running over in Washington. So we're both very, very excited that we're going over to Washington to present at the IACP conference. That was like a New Year's resolution for Clarissa, so I am going to put it out there and say I'm really proud of us. Poor Anne-Marie got dragged along.
I'm very happily dragged along, I should say.
I said to her, I'm going to pitch for this thing, and she said, oh, I just don't think we could go this year, and I just didn't tell her that I pitched, so I pitched for it.
So we're off.
And I got it, and now she's coming. So we're really excited, and we thought we'd share with you part of what we've been working on in terms of our presentation over there. And it, again, hopefully give you guys some resources and some tools that will help you to grow your collaborative practice over here. I also thought today, I warned you of a bit of a top secret exciting thing. I'm not sure how exciting it is, but I thought I might give away a copy of my book, which I will happily post to you, complete with chocolate sweets. If you, now you had the answer to this.
So I would be very excited to hear of any other ways to engage the other party that we haven't talked about, whether it's worked or whether it's an idea. Lawyers are notoriously bad, except for Clarissa, in thinking outside the box. And part of what will make this process work is thinking outside the box of our thought process as lawyers. Think about what resonates with people. And if you've got a great idea, please share it.
So you can type it in now. You can email it to us. Oh, Chris, you're dobbing Bev in. Oh, Bev's going to share her materials for us. That might be an idea right there. Yeah. Bev, share materials. Now's the time. Kate, I haven't seen any questions from Townsville, so now's the time for you guys to brainstorm. I know you all have copies of my book, but I think you've got version 1 and version 2 is far more exciting. So I can get that up to you. So you've got a few minutes while I rabbit on a bit more for you to throw through any ideas that you might have, because, yeah, I agree with Anne-Marie, like anyone that can come up with anything, it's worth trying. That's how this stuff got off the ground. Someone had an idea. Oh, Peter, you're very good. Peter's saying that he's giving 2 copies of Splitsville to his client. Peter kindly grabbed quite a few copies of my book to hand out to his client. So I know that's something that you're doing down in New South Wales, is using the book as an opportunity to get people thinking about ways they can do their divorce. So, and I'm happy for anyone to do that, obviously. And one last thing, I think most of you have been through training, certainly with me, but Anne-Marie and I are running a introductory collaborative training program here in Brisbane on the 13th and 14th of November this year. You're welcome, obviously, to come back if you've done it before and you're wanting a bit of a refresh. Every time I do these programs, I redo it and I think again, and I've always learnt so much more. We'll obviously be back from Washington there, so I'm hoping that Washington's going to give us both a lot more information and ideas that we can come back and share with you all as well. But we'd love to see a couple of you at the training. Here come my ideas, yay! So I've got June. Hi June, haven't seen you for ages. reframe discussion in client language. Such a great statement. That's so true. Something for us all to think about. We all, as professionals, do just talk in lingo all the time. And I think I've said this to people that have listened to me before. One of my epiphanies when I started writing my blog was that I didn't need to write for all of you. You're all lovely, but none of you need to know what's in my brain. What I was interested in writing about and writing for were the humans, as I call them, the people. So my language is very, I think anyway, just ordinary. And I don't talk about complex legal concepts because that doesn't make a lot of sense to most people.
I think that's really helpful advice. I have to tell myself, because I'm a bit of a law nerd, before I go into every meeting with a client, talk to these people like their mums in the school playground who you don't want to look at you like you're a total freak. You just want them to understand that you are a compassionate human being with reasonable communication skills.
So June, I'm seeing a book coming your way. Chris is saying public seminars avoid a court divorce. And I love that idea. Emma and I have tried to do it. We just can't get time in our calendars. I think, Chris, you guys have done it down there. I've seen in Adelaide, the collaborative professionals have got together and they've been running, information sessions for the public around Chris's title here, Avoid a Court Divorce. And that language fits in with what June's saying. It doesn't say do collaborative practice for your divorce, because that means nothing and that's not going to get anyone to your seminar. But Avoid a Court Divorce, that's a great title, and it's a great way of humanising the concept and inviting people in. Hi, Natasha. Hope it's a sunny day on the Gold Coast. She says, giving a client resources to discuss with their partner, including YouTube clips. And yeah, I agree. YouTube, there are great resources there. That's somewhere I always go when I'm about to finalise a training program. And I do a Google collaborative practice. And the wonderful thing about the Americans is that they're putting more and more resources on YouTube. So Rita Pollack is a great example of that. She's got hundreds of small YouTube clips of different parts of a collaborative process sitting on her YouTube channel. And as a professional, they're great because you can see little bits and pieces. But for clients, there's some really good resources on there. Resolution, I think it is in the UK, have a great video of a couple talking about their experience of collaborative practice, and that's a really powerful thing.
Last year, QCL sent around details of a YouTube clip. I just can't recall the name of it. It might come to me if I keep talking, like most things. It is an animation of effectively what not to do, and a really bleak illustration of the pressure that children are exposed to when their parents separate. So QCL is certainly trying to give access to all members with this kind of information, and it's valuable when you're building your information bank. And also, as Clarissa was saying, not all people want to read a big shiny brochure. Different things resonate with different folk.
And Chris is just saying, in terms of your seminars down there, expensive to advertise. Two things on that, Chris. Firstly, listen to our marketing webinar next time, because I'll give you some tips on that in terms of advertising. And B, if you want to give me a call and have a chat about some options that you could utilise, that I'm pretty sure I could give you some really good ideas on free advertising for something like that. There's two things that immediately come to mind. The first would be a media release to your local media on a group of local professionals seeing the challenges faced by families in traditional divorce processes, grabbing some statistics coming out of the courts at the moment of delays, cost, all of those sorts of things. So there's your bad news story, but your good news story at the bottom of it is you guys are offering these public seminars, whether they're free, cost, whatever it is. I think your local media would jump on that, in my view. That's certainly something that I've had experience with up here. The second thing is Facebook is a massive opportunity for advertising for free, and that's something I'd be happy to talk to you about more specifically if you want some guidance on those 2 points. But my view is you could absolutely join together and run those sorts of seminars as groups of professionals, and I think there are ways that you could market it that would be very cost effective. So that's my 2 cents. And Natasha's telling us it's a nice day in the Gold Coast. So good. It was nice here in Brisbane, but it was raining just before, so I'm not sure. Anyway, my rambling has finished. Thanks so much, guys, and thanks for joining us, and thanks for your interaction today, because it's really nice when we're getting questions and comments. It really helps us. I have to correct this slide. So I did this quite late last night. So I was tired. So I've said thank you from the 2 tired boys by day, mums by night. Anne-Marie corrected me this morning and said she's not tired because she's past the stage of young children waking up at night.
I do want to say, one thing that's a very deliberate inclusion there for collaborative practitioners in ways that strike me two ways. One is that letting clients into you as a human being. I'm not saying you tell everyone how many children you've got or how old they are or what your personal marital status is, but just being human will allow you to unlock things from them. And one of the reasons why I do feel fatigued is that I continue to have a foot in two camps. I continue to do litigious work and traditional negotiation work, as well as collaborative practice. And bridging those gaps can be exhausting when your mind and heart is really very clearly in one direction. The more practitioners that do this work, the more we can all do this work, and the less the gap has to be bridged.
And the less tired I'm going to be. Is that what you're telling me?
Yes.
Yay for me.
We will all love coming to work.
So thanks so much, everybody. Thanks for your feedback. Hopefully we'll see you online again in September. If there are any questions or any topic ideas, anything you want us to cover, please email them through to either of us, because that will help us in our planning. We hope to keep offering these to you, subject to diaries and those sorts of fun things, but our aim is to keep offering these to you moving forward. So thanks so much, and we're going to log out.
Thanks, everyone.